Hi, welcome to Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and chit chat about intriguing and sometimes controversial topics through the lens of skepticism. We are Josh, Richard, and Laura, and we have with us today our guest host, Dr. Richard Firth-Godbehere, author of A Human History of Emotion. We are going to be discussing bad science. So grab your English tea or Josh mentioned pickle juice last week, so if you've never had a shot of that before, grab a cup and experiment. While you do so, join us as we discuss what happens when a good process goes bad. This is Skeptic Hangout, Bad Science. So first, let's start by introducing our guest host, Dr. Godbehere. Thank you for having her. I'm going to cut this part out.
Thank you for having us on our podcast.
Thank you for having us on. I'm so honored. No.
That's fine.
No, so thank you for being here. I'm really excited. This is the first time I've had an opportunity to meet you. And so we're just going to jump right into having a discussion cold, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. It's good to be here. It's very late where I am, but I have caffeine basically injected into my veins, so we're good to go.
Yeah, we Americans are very pretentious, so we make you Brits record it like god awful early in the morning, just so that we can get our nice convenient schedule.
I'm part musician, so I'm up now anyway, usually, so it's fine.
Oh, musician and doctor and author. That's a good resume right there.
I live in interesting times.
So we're going to be talking bad science. And is there such thing as bad science, or is there just people doing science poorly?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking when I think of bad science, I think of people who... There's two layers to it, right? There's the scientists who sometimes do some terrible, terrible science, usually based on the old cargo cult method. They don't actually do the research themselves. They look at other things and say, oh, that must be so. And then they do something based on it. And then there's science journalists, and I'm supposed to be one of them, so I should be kind. And they can then misinterpret even good science and make it sound bad. And that's kind of what I'm thinking when I hear the phrase bad science. Those kind of two things.
The only thing I can think of a third too, where you talk about sort of like deliberately bad science, right? Like I think of like the Ken Hams or like the flat earthers, where they're presented with good science. They have all the opportunity to do good science. All the literature is there in front of them. All the studies are there in front of them. And they choose to either cherry pick or just completely disregard what's there and insert their own. Like that to me, when I hear bad science, that's the first thing I think of. And it probably happens less often than just scientists doing things poorly. But to me, that's the one that bothers me the most.
Well, there's also a lot of people manipulating things that to make it sound like they're science. We're going into pseudoscience when we do that, like homeopathy. If you don't know anything about the scientific method or anything like that, you can hear water has memory. Huh. That sounds like maybe it has something to it if you know absolutely nothing at all. And so they just like watering down the ingredients to get you some kind of medicine. But you can like, I've watched podcasts or listened to podcasts that have just eaten like 100 pills from homeopathy and not overdosed in the slightest, not even really felt a tingle. So like there's no medicine there. I mean, that might not prove that the water doesn't work or anything, but the fact that it doesn't have any scientific studies to back it up, that definitely proves, well, doesn't 100% prove, but it definitely shows that there's probably nothing to it.
Yeah, it's that kind of bad science, the homeopathy and the old we all came from Iraq nonsense. That's a category I missed. But yeah, homeopathy is a particular bugbear of mine because I'm about to get drunk on this very strong beer. There was beer in this glass about 5 days ago, so obviously it's going to do my face in. So.
There's memory of the beer in that glass right now, and that's how you're going to get wasted.
Exactly.
I wonder if like anybody's ever thought of doing a brewery like that. Like, yeah, we don't brew the beer here, but these had it. This is how you drink healthy. These had beer in it a while ago. I drank all that beer for you, but there's a little bit of remnant in there. We just didn't pouring the water on top of it.
It's that thing, isn't it? If I was just a shade more evil, I could be a millionaire tomorrow with ideas like that.
I know, right? I was kind of thinking like the first place my mind went when you talk about water having memory is like that means like the water you're drinking is full of things like fish pee and like feces and stuff like that, right? Because water remembers. So it's like if it remembers your medicine, what makes you think it doesn't remember things you don't want to have in your body?
I think it was might have been Lemmy Kilmister who said he doesn't drink water because fish pee in there.
Oh
So
dear.
like there's some science to that.
Sounds like Lemmy.
My
But
question to him is what does he drink?
oh, he drank a lot of whiskey. He doesn't drink much anymore, unfortunately, but he drank a lot of whiskey. But there's also other areas. I've gotten in arguments on this area of pseudoscience. In ghost hunters manage to make themselves look like they have a scientific process to it because they have the scientific materials, and there's definitely those were made using science, but the way they're utilizing them aren't using the scientific method at all because of like finding cold spots doesn't really mean anything. Finding EMPs, I think electronic EVPs
EVP.
doesn't find anything. There's no, it's picking up stuff, but it doesn't mean that, oh, you're getting a ghost. It just means that
Right.
it's picked up something.
Right. And I think we kind of take for granted. I mean, if we're going to talk about those along those lines, we really take for granted just how many radio waves and stuff like that are in the air. So when you talk about this equipment that's designed to pick up certain things, right? Even if it's not just an FM radio, like you can pick up radio waves and other sounds, right? That the equipment is sensitive to that has nothing to do. I mean, we're just surrounded by them. We just don't pick them up, right?
Yeah, I was playing with there's an online website. I think it's one of the Dutch universities that is a massive shortwave radio. So I was looking for those spy channels, number stations on it. They're everywhere, these signals, data flying through the air all the time. And there's a really interesting, I got to listen to a New Zealand radio station about shortwave radio station. That was all a bit meta in the end. So
That's awesome. So when I think about bad science, what do you guys think about the idea of like, okay, so you have a good scientific method and the person doing the science understands the scientific method only enough to misapply it, right? Like for example, they think they're coming to good conclusions, but they don't really understand how to interpret data, or they don't understand how to do the tests in a way that's like what would you call it? Like clear, right? Like comes up with good reliable results, right? And like the people I'm thinking of right now are kind of like the flat earthers, where they will show a high level of scientific comprehension and they'll completely misapply it. And I have to assume at least some of them aren't doing it deliberately. Like they really do have themselves convinced that they're doing good science.
Is that science?
Bad
Well,
science.
they'll use. Again, I push back on the bad science because the scientific method is what it is. It's the people utilizing the
Right.
science that are doing it poorly. So
We should say science done poorly instead of saying bad science. Science
yeah,
done
it
badly.
sounds like we're reprimanding the science, unless like the kind of bad science I would go for is anything done in like leather can go and do like bad science. Like if you're doing it like that, you got like your Judas Priest gear on or something, you might be able to do some bad, naughty
Bad.
science. But that's about as close as I can come to thinking of actual bad science. Otherwise, it's just people missing out on like variables are a lot of things that I see in like the anti-vaxxers or the flat earth movement. And is they'll come up with a bunch of things that sound good on their own, but they'll forget about all the factors that they're supposed to be keeping track of in order to make that science work. And it comes, that's because people take like rudimentary understandings of like something they heard on YouTube where all that sounds like I go into the conspiracy theory forums all the time and I'll listen to their things and like it sounds really good. If I didn't know better, I could fully fall for it.
Yeah.
But then you gotta find explanations for what they're missing, and there almost always is an explanation for whatever theory they're throwing out there that they haven't looked into it. Which honestly, it's never required much research to look into to debunk the flat Earth or debunk anti-vax stuff. But if you're only going by what you're hearing repeated in forums or like mom Facebook groups, unfortunately, you're gonna have a poor understanding of what the actual science is.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction as well between that kind of, let's call them kind of people who think they're doing science but with no credentials, and
We don't have to have
genuine
credentials
people
to
who've
do
gone to
science.
school and done the work and got the qualifications, and then deliberately misapply it like some creationists do. You know, you've got creationist organizations who are paying people to go and get these qualifications to deliberately misapply the science, and then you come out and I've seen them in reputable journals. They've published articles that are worded in such a way that they're very dishonest, because they come out in with the wording that you know, this thing may be plausible, but if you actually read between the lines, they're not actually saying anything, and they get published in reputable articles. I've reported them 2 articles before because of the dishonesty, and they've not declared any bias in the work. And that's specifically why I've reported these people, because they've, you know, they work for the Discovery Institute, or they're connected with the Discovery Institute, or other kind of pseudoscientific is it pseudoscience? The qualified? I don't know. Other such places, and then they don't declare any bias in the work, and I think that's blatantly dishonest. When you've got an agenda and you're trying to push that agenda, and you're writing your articles in such a way that they pass scrutiny so they can get published, but yet at the same time that agenda isn't, you know, they don't go out and say, oh yeah, by the way, our agenda here is to promote, you know, God as a thing, and to try and prove God, but they're getting published in reputable journals because they've got the qualifications, they've done the schooling, they know the methods. They are being deliberately dishonest in the way they do things.
So let's touch on this for just a second, because I think this is really, really important. And I think that accidental or bad science, like where they have good intentions and then they come to wrong conclusions, that's bad enough, and it can be damaging, especially depending on the conclusions that they come to. But at least it's done in a process where they're at least trying. But this is something that people don't necessarily think about. Like, you can go to a college and you can take a biology major or a physics major, and they can say, here's what you need to learn to pass the test. And now that you've passed the test, here's your degree. And the person doesn't have to believe that stuff. They don't have to have any sort of worldview that corresponds with that stuff. They're literally just answering test questions or applying certain concepts academically, and proving that they have the intellect to take that concept and apply it. It doesn't mean they have to believe it. So when you talk about, like, oh, so-and-so from the Discovery Institute, right? That's Ken Hams or something. I can't remember. But they have a degree in biology, right? Therefore, they know what they're talking about. But going and getting a degree and applying skepticism and logic and challenging your own beliefs are 2 completely different things. And so that's kind of one thing that I find kind of scary, is that you can have a degree. That doesn't make you a good scientist, right? That doesn't make you skeptical, and that doesn't mean that you're doing things in a way that, like, challenges and reinforces hypotheses, right? You could be full of total shit at the end of the day, but you have a degree.
Yeah, this is why science literacy is important in the general population, because the reason a lot of these people get away with that is because people don't look into it enough. And if I can pick on the science communicators a little bit, that's what we get sometimes. You know, I've got a bunch of magazines behind me, kind of science monthly magazines, and they're all full of kind of grab your attention headlines. And a lot of people will read those stories from the communicators and say, right, that's it, this is what's happening. But, you know, the way you should use those articles is to read them, then go and do the further research to get, you know, the story behind the story. Richard, what's your opinion? You are one of these people.
Well, there's a couple of things on that what you were just saying then, absolutely. One of the things that bothers me, I mean, there was recently a big headline went round that said that mindfulness practices in schools do not help with kids' behavior. And that was the headline. But if you read the paper, what it said was that mindfulness practices don't immediately help, but they do calm the class overall over a long period of time. And you sort of, people are sharing this and saying, see, this is all woke nonsense. And you're like, no. But also what one of the things that really worries me when we're talking about people who go and get a degree and get something published in a reputable journal is how. I mean, I do peer review and I have people come send me things and it's blind. So I don't know what the biases are. I don't even know who they are. And that's as it should be, because if I think they're a bit of an idiot, I might be a little bit tougher on them. But yeah, we don't want that. So I get peer review and I'd spot it. I spot it in stuff I get a mile away. I'm like, this person hasn't read anything for like 10 years and they haven't got a clue what's going on in the field right now. And I make all these notes and suggest to them, you ought to read this, you ought to read this, you ought to look at this. So if someone's sending a paper, which is basically creationism, to a biology journal, and a biologist with a PhD is getting it, I'd hope they go, you know, this thing isn't really a motor like that. It's actually just a cell. And you know, this thing is that, and you're describing that wrong. You need to read this. And that doesn't seem to happen as robustly as it ought at peer review, which bothers me. And also, how are these people getting through the PhD process? That's 4 years they have to effectively lie for, you know, of PhD. 4 years I have to say, yes, I believe in this, honest gov. Because if they try to do a PhD in creationism, they'd either win a Nobel Prize or not get the PhD, not finish. You know, it's one or the other. So yeah, that the whole train bothers me, from how are they getting into these journals, and then the communicators, because there are some very, very good science communicators. I know quite a few who take a lot of time, and we stick within our field, so we know what we're talking about. We don't wander off, and I wouldn't go and do a Egyptology article because I know nothing about it. I'd find one of my mates who does, you know. And then you get the others who will just jump on anything because they need the money. And so they get it wrong and it all gets messed up. But yeah, that's the bit that bothers me. How does he even get there in the first place? How does this bad science get into the journals? It really shouldn't.
What's interesting is I kind of, from what I've heard them say in terms of like watching some of their YouTube videos and stuff, I'm postulating this. I don't know this for a fact, but this is my hypothesis, is that they are on such a crusade for what they believe is the truth that they don't see what they're doing as being unethical. They're like, I'm getting the biology degree to prove, and some are getting biology degrees at Christian colleges, right? So some of these biology degrees, I wouldn't even necessarily consider them degrees, right? Because you can't really verify what they've learned and how that information has been scrutinized. So that I think is something that I've seen the most often, is getting these PhDs. Like I know a chaplain who just, like, I don't think he belongs anywhere in the educating pool, like educating anyone on anything. And yet he has a PhD and he got it from a Christian college, and he writes and publishes his own books, right? And they're all biblical based, and he spouts a whole bunch of nonsense, but he did a lot of research and a lot of hard work to get that PhD. I mean, he put the hours in, but the information he's being presented just reinforces his beliefs and his worldview. But yeah, going to a reputable college, I have to assume there's some sort of like crusade there where they and this is me being generous and kind, I think that they think they're doing the right thing by like infiltrating the enemy. But I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Science is the enemy, but kind of.
Isn't that crazy? Don't ask questions.
Also, just to
touch
on what you said, Laura, there's an extra layer to that as well. It's not just the people who go to the Christian colleges, which
and it could be any religion, by the way.
But there's also the people who buy their degrees.
Oh yeah. Hello, my name is Kent Hovind.
Yeah.
Well, he wears a lab coat in his videos, so you got to take him seriously. But
does anyone say, other than Matt Powell, does anybody take Kent Hovind seriously?
He has this little flock of.
I just said I took him serious because of the lab coat. What more peer review do you need than that? You see a guy in a white lab coat, you just automatically assume there's science coming out of that mouth.
And he's in an office too. Yeah. Yeah.
I've
Has
heard
slides.
I've heard a lot of them get around the peer review process by they have their own like scientific magazines and journals, but they're strictly like Christian scientific magazines and journals. So I should put quotes for people that are listening and not watching, air quotes around scientific journals, because they're getting peer reviewed by guys that read, oh, that matches up with what I saw in the Bible. So yeah, that's science right there. When every single like creationism model I've heard makes huge leaps in logic.
Yeah.
To get their point across. Like they're going from A to Z to G, wherever, and just like inputting their own info that's not based on any like verifiable predictions or anything like that. It's just what fits into their Bible and what they can kind of make sound good to people that mostly have been indoctrinated into it, because I never was indoctrinated into Christianity, so it always sounded weird to me, their ideas.
Yeah, many claims of which are actually very easily countered or debunked. The problem is it's not getting to the people who are listening to them, right? So there's definitely scientific, or I should say scientists out there that are taking the time to counter these people and to put the good science out there. And yet it's getting to our ears, the people who already are like, yeah, you tell them, right? And it's not necessarily getting to the listeners.
Well, like the bad science I've heard from them mostly is it's never actually proving creationism. It's poking holes in evolution, or where they think there's holes in evolution. And that's bad science. If your science should not be saying these guys are saying this, so our idea is right. Your idea should have nothing to do with whatever the hell they're saying. It should be you proving your own facts or proving your own model instead of like trying to disprove somebody else's model.
Yeah. So a couple of bits of what we're saying about learning about scientific literacy there. One is the journal thing. That people don't learn that there is a hierarchy of journals, and at the top you've got Nature and the things that are, you know, hard to get into because it has to be really robust. And at the bottom you've got these creationist things that they'll publish any old rubbish. Send them in a toilet roll with some scribbles on it and it'll get in there somewhere. They don't care. And there's everything in between. So you need to learn there is a hierarchy, learn what journal it's in. But also, you know, things like that it's fine. If you want to say a paper saying this aspect of evolution has a problem, fine. That can just say that, though. If you then say, so I need to stick my favorite fairy tale in the hole, that's when you've got a problem, because you have to demonstrate that as well. And that's where it falls apart. There are almost certainly aspects of evolution that we have not enough information to properly understand. Great, point them out, say where they are so we can explore them more thoroughly. But don't then, you know, come up with the rubbish to explain it. You don't know. You don't know what the problem is.
There's also a lot of there's I can't remember her name. There's a climate scientist, one of the world's leading climate scientists, by the way, who is a climate change denier, ironically, and she's actually wants to get rid of peer review. There's a bunch of people out there who have an agenda, who want to get rid of peer review because it gets in the way of their. They want to go out there and just say the shit they want to say without retribution for it. And one of the ways to try to do that is by getting rid of wanting to get rid of the peer review process.
Yeah, well, peer review isn't perfect. It has issues.
No.
And the problem is people like that find these little issues, like there's a replication that very rarely do editors of journals send replications, especially if they're negative replications, to peer review for some reason. So you can have a paper that's wrong and it can stay in the record forever without being corrected. There's an issue with somebody who thought they'd proven precognition a while back. They'd done an experiment. It proved that you could predict the future.
You were going to bring that up, by the way.
And then four different people all did a paper to say, no, that's wrong. And they ended up having to put it in PLOS One because the same journal wouldn't publish them saying, no, actually, that's wrong.
Wow.
I know the guy who did one of the replications and he was angry, really, really angry about that. And So they take these little problems like that, and they take other problems, like there is a thing where somebody higher up, I don't do this because I'm a good boy, but you'll get people get a paper on a subject, and the first thing they'll do is look at the back, see if their name is in it, if they've been cited, and if not, then they'll immediately reject it because they're
because they know everything. They're right. And if they're not cited, clearly it's wrong.
Yeah. I was about to use a different word, but I don't know what the age group for this show is. So
Over
I
18.
will not use that word.
You can say whatever the fuck you want, man.
Yeah.
Wankers. That was the kind of word. That
Oh,
was
that's
thinking
so
of.
mild here. I love
I
it.
know. I was trying to
Like,
keep
that's the
somewhere
worst.
mid-range.
I like it.
I think motherfuckers is too rude, so I'll not say that.
Yeah, please don't say motherfuckers on here.
No, definitely not.
At least wait till
But,
the end of the
you know.
show.
But yeah, it's that's an issue, and they'll use these to say, see, peer review's wrong. It's like, no, peer review needs to be more robust, even more robust than it is now. That's what it needs to be, not the opposite. Don't get rid of it. What you're talking about? So yeah, and it's frustrating. It happens in the field some of the fields I work in as well, where they'll say they'll come up with some nonsense history and say, well, peer review says that Atlantis wasn't really in the Mediterranean basin, so we were going to publish ourselves. It's like, yeah, but that's because it wasn't.
I mean, if you took away peer review, what would you replace it with? Does anybody just get to put out any scientific theory that they want?
Yes, I think that's the
generally
point.
accepted.
Wow.
There has been an attempt at this, and it didn't go well because instead of peer review, they had real-time correction. So what happened was you could publish your paper, then scientists could come in and put notes on it. So what they ended up with is they published their paper, and it'd just be a wall of red going, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap. No, that's wrong, that's crap, that's crap, that's crap. Oh, very good point. That's crap, that's crap. So yeah, it's even more tougher than peer review, that idea. So good luck to them.
Yeah,
So you bring.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you bring up a really good point when you're talking about internal, because we do a lot of, like, especially in the beginning, we hit hard on creationists, and it tends to be hard to avoid that kind of conversation when we talk about bad science. But what you're talking about is, and not bad science done badly. But what you're talking about is within the scientific community, there are issues too. And that's really important, because the more that we try to cover or hide or don't discuss, or we try to glorify the scientific community beyond what they're actually capable of doing right now, we end up shooting ourselves in the foot, because then you do have people that are like, well, look, these guys can't do science either. So what makes their science more valid than our science? Or look, this guy published this, and then there were rebuttals. And so you guys are saying that science is all perfect, and here's his answer, but look, he was wrong. Right. And so you tend to get this sort of, we leave so many blemishes unaddressed that it's almost like cannon fodder, for people who.
Yeah, I was just going to bring that up. What makes good science and good skepticism, by the way, what makes it good is the fact that we can sit here and say, whether you're a scientist or a skeptic, what you can do is you can sit here and say, I was wrong. Or you can turn around, and I could turn around and say, Laura, you were wrong. And Laura will say, yes, thank you for pointing that out. And that's what makes it good, but it's also what gives the other side the kind of cannon fodder that they think is a golden bullet, by saying, well, look, this person's admitted that they're wrong. And they don't seem to understand that that's good, self-correcting. And that's part of what makes it very, very good.
You mean sticking to what was written down 2,000 years ago isn't how I should just go with it? Like,
it's totally how you should go with it.
Yeah, whatever's been out there the longest is what we should be going by. That's good science, is from what I've learned.
Gosh, if you could find a Christian that actually believes what was written down 2,000 years ago, I'll give you a lot of money, because most of them don't. What they do is interpret those texts in the way that they want to interpret them.
I'm sure I can find at least one, so you better owe me some money.
Oh, I bet you can't. I bet you can't. My favorite one is Christians who say that God is love. And I'll say to them, so what did love mean in the 1st century AD? And they look at me blank, and I go, come on, explain to me. Because this is my field. Emotions in history is my field. So what was love in the 1st century AD? So, well, it's love, isn't it? I say, no, it was an attraction of two bodies towards each other. So that's what kept you on the ground. That's what they thought gravity was. It was this attraction, this love. And God, you're pulled towards him, towards the fini, towards the end. It's a pulling towards. Does that sound like the love you're talking about? I go, no. I go, so you don't even get that bit right.
No,
Don't even
that's
understand
true.
that.
And then they redefine the characteristics of love, because the God in the Bible is not a very nice guy, not very loving at all.
No.
In fact,
He's good.
very,
He's good. It was my fault that he was bad to me. Come on.
yeah, you
It's
deserve
all
it.
on
In
me.
your case, you're right. But no, but if you were to ask a person today, what characteristics are shown, like do people show when they love somebody, it'd be the exact opposite of many of God's actions in the Bible. So you're right, there's like this dissonance between what's written there. I know we're getting off topic from the science done badly to
Well, if you're talking about God, it's almost some people consider it science, so we can still be in the ballpark. Oh, you can go on after
I
that.
totally forgot what I was saying. When you took over and my mind went blank, I was like, what was I just saying?
We were talking about love.
Oh, yeah. So, but going back to the original point of interpreting old documents and stuff like that.
Yeah.
One thing that I think we could do better as a scientific community, you talked about science education earlier, is educate on those kinds of things, like promote the idea of looking at old ideas and scrutinizing them. And okay, let's even go back to like Copernicus and Galileo and how did they do their process and what did they get wrong? Because they did a lot of really good science and they really advanced our knowledge of the universe. However, they didn't get everything perfect either, and their original models, have since changed and stuff like that. So, I think teaching people that the process is always an ongoing process, and teaching people that the mistakes are what we build on. They're not what we build as a foundation. They're what we build. Like we can move completely away from something as soon as we learn that is the right thing to do. In other words, like it's not something that we make so foundational that we can't move away from it. The problem is when you go to school, like I don't know how it is in England, but in America, like it's pretty much what you're presented is cemented knowledge, period. We're not necessarily taught to question. We're not taught necessarily to be skeptical. It's here's this current scientific understanding of X, right? And I think it's getting more common now to teach critical thinking and skepticism. Definitely when I went through high school, it wasn't really there at all. It was just here's your textbook, memorize these facts, right? And like history is a great example of science done badly, where we have history books that are written and then rewritten, but not necessarily evaluated. So we're getting taught the same, say, whitewashed history, for example.
Yeah, that's interesting because I teach first year undergraduates occasionally when they force me to at gunpoint. And it's fun, actually. It's great fun. My job is to break them in. So by the end of the first semester, I want all of them to doubt even me. That's what I do. It's like, do not believe anybody. Do not believe anything. If you read it, check it. And then when you've checked it, check the person who checked it. If you want to get a first-class mark, you have to be, the trick is to doubt everything and come up with your own voice.
There is the problem with people that don't know how to doubt properly, though, because of sometimes conspiracies turn out to be true. Sometimes there is false information put out there that's accepted by the public. Like cigarette companies for the longest time knew that smoking was bad for you, and they would put out like wrong propaganda and like incorrect science, and they'd manipulate the numbers in order to make it not sound bad. Same with climate change. People that are against the science of climate change, they'll put out their own numbers and show like, yeah, climate's has changed, but it has nothing to do with us. They'll try and manipulate the facts to say like, this is just the way the world is. And then this is how you get conspiracy theorists, because they'll see like, these people have tried to manipulate us before, or people have used science to try and manipulate us before. We can't trust it now. When instead of like questioning it and then like looking into it, they're questioning it and say, because these people have a motive, we can't trust them at all. That's what's happened so much with the anti-vax movement is they're like, these companies just want to make money, so we can't trust them at all. When every company needs to make money in order to fund further research, you need money. So yes, I would hope that the people working on the vaccines are working for money, because that's saving lives. Please pay these people.
Right.
Yeah.
What you're talking about is the difference between skepticism and cynicism. And you're right. If we're teaching too much skepticism, and I'm not saying there's such a thing as too much skepticism, I think they're two completely separate things, right?
Mm.
But I see what you're saying, and I'm wondering what combination, and I don't have any answers. I'm more like throwing it out to you guys. What combination of factors turns a person from a skeptic to a cynic, where and potentially even a conspiracy theorist, where they're like, fuck all this information, you people are liars, I'm not going to trust anything, and I'm going to come up with my own theories, and I'm going to have my own data to support. And what factors do you guys think are necessary to make that switch?
I think
Them.
it's ignorance and confidence.
I think
So-
it's them, because you can guarantee in almost every situation where it turns into a conspiracy theory, and we've done an episode on conspiracy theory before, a long time ago, in the dark past of this podcast. But every time you can almost guarantee that there will be a leap from, well, this doesn't add up, this doesn't add up, this doesn't add up, till, well, they are hiding something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's them, this mysterious them, this mysterious they, the aren't actually a body of people that exist, but they're the ones hiding something.
It more seems like when they're following the money instead of following the science is when the conspiracy theories really try to start to prop up. Because anytime I've heard a conspiracy theory, money has come up as the majority of the reasons why they believe what they believe. That's why so many people went so hard against the vaccines and Bill Gates, because Bill Gates, who has all the money in the world, needs more money. So of course he's going to use vaccine money to kill off a bunch of people, apparently, is what I've read. It got pretty out there. But it was definitely following the money. I'd say it's confidence, scientific ignorance, and thinking that you're smarter than you are is what really leads to conspiracy theories.
Yeah, there's a fabulous book by a guy I know called Rob Brotherton, called Suspicious Minds. He's a psychologist who studies conspiracy theories. And amongst other things, he believes that the main thing that drives a conspiracy theorist is a need to know something other people don't. A need to, this can't be all there is, there must be something else. It's like, I had a chat with him, he likens it to the invisible hand of the economy. You see the way the economy works, everyone says there must be somebody controlling this. And there isn't. It's just kind of runs the way it does, and it ebbs and flows because of currents within it. But it's easy to believe that no, there's some cabal controlling the money. And then once you believe that, you go, I know something other people don't. These sheeple, they don't know that. And that gives you a sort of feeling of confidence and like, yeah, I know better and I'm better than those other people. And it becomes a spiral. And you start to learn more and more conspiracies. He also found out, Rob, that people can hold two contradictory conspiracy theories at the same time. So he had people who said they don't believe the moon landings ever happened, and that America got to the moon 20 years earlier.
Wow.
They believe both at the same time.
Yeah, I was just listening to a podcast where they went to like an alien convention, and they both believed that the government was hiding aliens, and then also that aliens were keeping the government from finding out about them. So like the government was both ignorant and masterminds in this scenario.
That's funny, because I was going to bring up aliens too. Like I was a big fan in sort of a parody sort of way of Ancient Aliens. Like I love the show, but because of how ridiculous it is, I love watching it and scrutinizing it. It's kind of like Mystery Science Theater 3000 for me. But they will in one episode take a certain specific landmark or monument or ancient ruins, and they'll explain it one way through one lens, because that's the theme of that show. And then 3 episodes later, they'll take the exact same landmark and they'll re-explain it differently, to where if you actually play those two next to each other, they're completely contradictory or two completely different stories, but both are narratives that fit whatever the theme of that episode is. And it's like these set number of hosts, and it's always the same guys. Like we all know and love Giorgio Tsoukalos, right? It's always the same, like 2 or 3 guys that are presenting these ideas, and they're contradicting themselves from previous episodes. So it's funny that you brought up aliens, because I think that's one of the most poignant And
Well,
most
that was synchronicity. That was part of the alien conspiracy, is why we were both thinking about it.
I love it. They're trying to confuse us.
Those communities are probably the most outlandish one, and like they were like, everybody has seen something probably in the sky that they don't know what it is, but just not knowing what it is, you don't get to take the leap in logic and say, oh, that's an alien. Or even honestly, even if you got taken aboard on a ship, and I don't think any of these people actually have been taken aboard on a ship. Even Travis Walton, I don't think he has been on a ship, but even if you got on there, you wouldn't be able to say aliens still. I think you'd have to prove that they came from another planet. So like, even if you got that far, I don't think you'd be justified in saying aliens, and they'll just point out a light in the sky and say aliens, and that's huge leaps.
I'm interested in why you said Travis Walton as though he's some kind of benchmark as legitimacy.
I don't know, but I got excited because that was actually the first podcast that Josh and I did together on his other podcast, Bloody Good Film, because my first movie I did with him. Yes, that one right there. For those of you who are listening, he just held up the Bloody Good Film podcast t-shirt. But that was the first one I did, was Fire in the Sky. So I just thought that was funny. I'm like, oh, nailed it. But Doctor, you were starting to say something, and I want to make sure you got your 2 cents in.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, when I was young, I saw a UFO. I was at home, and I looked out the window, and I saw a circle that kept spinning and changing color. It just kept changing color. It was about the size of the moon, went red and green and blue. And I thought maybe I dreamt it. And the next day, my mate came up to me and said, "Did you see that weird thing last night over the hill?" 10 years later, declassified documents told us that in the hills beyond where I lived was a secret military base. And I went, aha! That wasn't aliens. That was something, you know. We got these things all the time. They're like planes that would crash and then disappear. They just weren't there when people went to look for them, and strange stuff like that. But yeah, there's usually an explanation. And I do like sorry, I was just going to say, I do like at the moment there's all these videos of things. And what governments are saying is there are things, but we don't know what they are. We think they may be some kind of foreign drones. Spy drones.
Unidentified means unidentified. You know? It does not mean alien. The U does not stand for alien.
No.
It's funny you should say that, because where you grew up and where I live are not tremendously far away from each other.
No.
Although you've moved on to more tropical climes of the sunny south now. And I see overhead certain parts of this region quite regularly, kind of black ops aircraft and things, and even still. And you know, when they come up, there's kind of a little bit of hoo-ha about them when there's like mass sightings of them. But yeah, it's still a thing around here where I don't know if there is still a secret military base. I don't know whether we're just on some flight path, but I see them quite regularly.
Yeah.
So we're coming up to the end of the show, but I think what you guys are talking about is an interesting way to end, because we're talking a lot about, you know, science done badly on purpose, and then we're talking about holes in the scientific community, and then maybe scientists who have good intentions but just don't quite get the science right. But what I see as being really prevalent, and this is what you guys are directly talking about, is like the citizen scientist, like the everyday person who thinks that they're skeptic. They think that they know a lot about how the world works and what's out there and what means what. And then they see something they don't understand, or they're presented with information that hits them a certain way. And so their minds kick in and they're like, well, I'm going to come to this conclusion. And it's the difference between seeing something or hearing something that you're not sure of and applying the scientific method, right or wrong. Even if you come to the wrong conclusion, at least trying to apply the scientific method and asking yourself, like, well, do I automatically have the answer, or is it possible to discover the answer? Like, very rarely do we just have the answer when it's something we don't know about to begin with, right? It's the difference between that person and the person who's like, I don't know, therefore insert my theory here. And because my theory makes sense in my head, and I've gone through all these mental leaps to get there, and I've applied all this knowledge that I do know, it's got to be the truth because it's the only one that makes sense to me. And I think that happens more often and with different kinds of topics, more often than not. I mean, there's 7.8 billion of us, and we misapply our logic and our knowledge all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
science isn't done through Google, especially if you're not trained to interpret the data. And that seems to be where a lot of bad science happens, is people doing Google foo and taking people's data that scientists didn't interpret this way, but people with novice brains are interpreting it in the ways that they think make sense. When, like I've said before, you don't understand the X factors or the variables in this, so you're interpreting it very poorly to reach your conclusions.
It's the good old the correct use of the Dunning-Kruger effect. A lot of people say it's that stupid people think they know a lot, and really what it is that all of us bizarrely are a bit more confident about things we don't know much about, because when we start to know a lot about something, we realize that we don't know much about it because there's a huge depth of information. So the actual subject that is my main study, I know I'm clueless about because I know how much of it there is. There's this
It's humbling.
endless chasm. But when it comes to other things, like how to make a good cup of coffee, I think I'm a genius. I'm probably terrible.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's a friend of some of ours on the show, Cynthia Mcdonald, who's absolutely hilarious and a great educator in her own right. She will often call me on in public and a resident expert in kind of biblical study and I'm not. I know nothing about it. I've barely scratched the surface, and it's kind of a pushback thing that we have between us, where she publicly announces my knowledge on the subject, and I publicly push back as much as possible. But yeah, you once you start studying a little bit, you realize how much there is that you don't know, and I think that's vitally important to have that realization. I think if you go into something thinking that you are an expert, I think that's the point where you need to stop and kind of check yourself.
Yeah, if you go into a field and you think you know the answer, then you need to automatically look at yourself as potentially being wrong. And that's something that's very difficult for us to do, right? And when we talked earlier about people who go in to get degrees, but they already know that they don't agree with the conclusions, they're just putting down the test answers to get the piece of paper, or the people that get degrees only from institutions that support their beliefs to begin with, that's not applying the scientific method. That's I would say that falls into what the doctor was talking about in terms of Dunning-Kruger, where you think you know more than you know, therefore you're gonna focus on stuff that reinforces that knowledge. And yeah, I think if there was something we were to leave with our audience in terms of like final thoughts, mine would be just to check yourself. Like I have people coming to me for advice oftentimes, a lot of times about relationship stuff, and I think it's because I speak well, and they think that, oh, a person who can articulate things must know what she's articulating, and that's just not true at all. I can't tell you how often I've told people, I'm not a therapist or I'm not a lawyer, right? Like, you need to go talk to somebody else about this kind of stuff. I feel for you and I'll listen if you need my ear, but I'm not an expert. Like, and I bring that up because I had to do that today, where I was like, you need to talk to your therapist about that, because whatever feedback I'm giving you is from just a person. It's just like my opinion, dude. And for you to take that as any sort of gospel would be a very big mistake.
You're in the situation that I think a couple of us are probably in, though, where you've hosted secular sexuality a few times with Christy, and Christy is qualified and is an expert in the field, and people kind of, I've had it before when I've hosted shows with really intelligent people. And you kind of, people think that you are intelligent by way of association, and that's not how it works. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. You listen to them, not me.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I want to get on to Josh's and Richard's other final thoughts. So which one of you two gentlemen would like to start with your final thoughts?
I already had my final thought. My final thought was what I said last. I thought we were already in our wrapping up phase. So just like, you don't know anything, I know everything. Come to me for your information.
Perfect. Brilliant. Spot on.
I think for me, the takeaway should be to everybody that if you don't think you haven't got a clue about something, then you probably haven't got a clue about something.
I like it. That was beautifully pithy, and I love it. On that note, thank you everybody for joining us. Just as a reminder, if you want this conversation to continue, we have our Facebook discussion group. So if you have your stories, if you have examples of good and bad science, if you have just like your opinions, dude, then hop on there and give us your opinions. I'd love to share this conversation with everybody. So don't forget to get on our Facebook discussion group and be a part of the conversation. Richard, thank you so much for joining us. As far as
Not a
I know, you're
problem.
going to continue to join us for the next couple of shows. And it's been a pleasure. So I'm looking forward to the next ones. All right, everybody. So in the meantime, keep questioning, interrogate your beliefs, and Josh.
Stay skeptical.